but if I need some food or something. So this athletic club here in Washington, the WAC, has been real good to me. And I'm thankful for the staff that they keep and their support along the way.
There was one thing that I wanted to bring up that has been very troubling for me throughout this whole case. The first part of this case was sent essentially trying to defend Antonio Mays Jr. from something he never did. The city brought forth the felony bar defense. They attempted to essentially frame Antonio Mays Jr. He did nothing wrong. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. They tried to paint him as a criminal. He was far from a criminal. This was a young man who came to Seattle to participate in a social movement, in a movement for change. He was 16 years old. He was a child. He'd come here with a message, and his message was that the police needed more training. That was his message. Not violence, not fighting, but a message. Similar to Martin Luther King, when he was 16 years old, he gave a message of segregation. Or he was 15 years old, he gave a speech about segregation. Well, that was the movement of his time. This was the movement of young Antonio Mays Jr.'s time. He was never able to reach his potential. The lies, the deceit that was put forward to try to paint this young man in a false light, a young man who had no criminal record, a young man who had no drugs, no alcohol in his system. They tried to paint him as a criminal. Well, the evidence showed that that was far from the truth. And the evidence also showed that this young man was abandoned. He was abandoned by the system. And I hope through this verdict that this doesn't happen to anyone ever again. And that's the message here. And I hope that Seattle is listening. And I hope that every municipality and city in this country is listening. You got to be there for your citizens. They count on you. If anybody has any questions, we're happy to field some questions. Sure.
Tell us about your son. How do you want him to be remembered when people are watching this tonight?
Excuse me, where are you from?
King 5.
King 5, okay.
My son was what I like to identify as an altruist. He wanted more for everybody. He wanted to help everybody. He was always, more concerned for others than he was himself. And, he had a big heart, and that runs in the family. He was a young entrepreneur at heart. He was a hard worker. He understood the multiple facets that I go through to generate the many different revenue streams we have in our family. And he loved and enjoyed and appreciated all of that, the good and the bad. Sometimes we take some hits and sometimes we go on some big vacations. It's ups and downs in life. So he was a realist, and he was proud to be black. I'll say that. There's a lot of people don't understand, what that is to be black in America. It's a significant thing, and not to, derail everybody's focus from what happened here in this emergency response system. But I raised my son to be a strong, young, proud black man. And he's seen me suffer, at the hands of, some racism many a times in his life. And I've talked to him about what he saw as, every time it happened. So, that's been a real facet in our lifestyle as black men in America. I've been a single dad for a long time. So, that's been something I had to teach him about. So to know my son and to know that he was strong, proud, black, positive, and big-hearted, kind-hearted, and hard-working, that's the kind of, memory that should resonate when they think about my son. Somebody that when you see him coming, he cares about you. His eyes go up and brighten up because he's looking to see the best in you. He wants to make you smile and make you laugh, and he wants to see you win, and he wants to win with you. So that's the kind of energy, my son had for people. So that's the kind of memory. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Antonio, you mentioned there's no resolution, you still feel a sense of emptiness. The
Yeah.
investigation is still open, the suspect has not been captured yet.
Yes.
Is that part of your longing for closure?
That's a huge void. You know, I think the ultimate void that, you know, it'll never be filled. I got to live on without him. You know, we had something special, me and my son, and we were long from done. I was learning from him and growing because of him. As a parent, I was learning from being a parent. You know, just learning from the reactions that I get from my son. He was my firstborn. So the reactions and the mistakes that I make with him, you know, push me to better myself, to change, you know, and I had him to thank for that, you know, and I explained those sorts of lessons that I learned from him. And losing him, to lose that, I lost a big part of myself. So, you know, it's not a, you know, it's not resolved. I mean, it's some form of accountability, which I appreciate the accountability, you know, and accountability needs to be heard. You know, I've always taught my son to own his, and I got to own mine in that. So, you know, accountability at this part, when he's been neglected and they delayed on him right here and they didn't get to him and make an effort to say, oh, somebody needs help, let's get to him, and make an effort to get to him, you know, yeah, you know, accountability needs to be. So there's been some accountability, yeah, but, you know, the fact that I got to live on without him, nothing's going to bring him back. So that, you know, there's nothing's going to fill that void.
Have you heard from investigators at all?
Not at all. Not at all. Not since maybe I heard from investigators maybe up to 3 months after it happened, and then it just went dark after that.
We're optimistic that the city will continue their investigation. There are a certain amount of documents that were under attorney's eyes only, and we're of the hope and desire that the city will ultimately find who shot this young man and bring him to justice. Anybody else have any questions? Yes, sir.
Obviously, you've explained the heaviness of the emotions talking about your son, reflecting on his life, and obviously the other kind of parts that still remain unresolved. But in light of today, you know, none of the city leadership is still kind of in place from when this all happened. Obviously, it's been so long, as you've talked about. You know, Mayor Durkin, Police Chief Best, City Council, Shama Sawan, all those people named, you know, there. They're no longer there. But today, you reached this verdict, and you know, a jury's decided that their actions were, you know, condemned and negligible. You know, what would you want to say to them today?
You know, they were taken out, right? I don't know you know, some things I don't know if I'm allowed to say, but there's been some things that took place along the way that I can't say I'm able to understand because, you know, I'm not a legal professional, you know, but, you know, I feel like some things got swept under the rug, if that's, you know, fair to say, you know, to put it mildly. You know, I don't want to speak too harshly about people, places, and things that legally I don't have the knowledge or profession to understand and expound on.
What I can say is that I'm very appreciative that Judge O'Donnell allowed this case to move forward. At times, we didn't always agree, but I have a tremendous amount of respect for him. The case went to trial. We came to verdict. He allowed us to bring the case, and for that I'm very grateful. I'm also grateful that the jury spent the time and the effort to deliberate. I mean, we did our closing arguments on January 8th. It's now the 29th. This was a very long deliberation. And I think they really went through the motions. They really weighed the evidence, and they did what our system's supposed to do, you know. And if anything, it's an amazing system. The jury system in this country is tremendous. Yes.
Would it help at all to hear from the current administration, Mayor Wilson, or any of the current council? I don't think any of them were here in 2020, but is that kind of what you were talking about earlier?
I think it'd be useful to hear from the new administration because the way the case was presented by the city attorney's office as it was, not as it is necessarily, it was a very difficult fight. And when I say a difficult fight, I mean it was a fight against injustice. It truly was. And so, yeah, it would be nice to hear from the new administration.
Do you
Because-
feel like you're owed that comment from the previous administration from 5 years ago?
I don't need a comment from the previous administration. I don't know how
Antonio?
Antonio feels.
You know, from my understanding, the previous administration stepped down. If from what I understand, they stepped down. They weren't reprimanded. They didn't have any consequence. So, if you're asking me as a civilian how I feel about that, that's disappointing to say the least for me. You know, I think that there should have been some consequence. So, I'm dumbfounded about that part. So,
Mr. Hayes, Will James from KOW. During your testimony at trial, your attorney, Evan O'Shan, was trying to ask you about how the trial was affecting you, and you weren't allowed to talk about that at trial. The judge made a ruling that you could talk about it, but it seemed like you had something you wanted to say about how the trial itself was having an impact on you. So I was wondering if you wanted to say that now, how the trial, witnessing the trial, the whole thing made you feel.
yeah, is there someone?
I mean, how you feel now? I mean,
Yeah, so, you know, while sitting through it all, a lot of things, you know, get divulged and become very apparent or evident, for that matter. And to see a city, and Seattle to me is a major city. You know, it's not some small back road town with a small population. Seattle's a major city. Put forth, a lot of effort, and money, to conjure up something that, is, doesn't exist. And with the tenure of experience that they have, they got a lot of legal experience, they clearly were trying to, create something that wasn't there, and, again, I don't want to speak too harshly about something that it's not my profession, but, these sorts of things were very offensive to me. I've been here again, like I said, since December 7th. I got a wife and kids at home. So I'm missing all my kids and my wife. They're missing me, and that's hard on me and hard on my family. It's a lot. I could probably sit here for longer than what you all have time for. Going over those sorts of details, but appreciate that. Thank you.
Question. We just heard from the city attorney's office, they said they're gonna assess their options going forward. Are you prepared for them to appeal this?
well, my response to that is we will assess our options appropriately as well. This is the lack of acceptance of responsibility I was talking about. This is the problem. And if this is what the new administration feels, if they have that same attitude, well, so be it. Okay. Never been an acceptance of responsibility. As far as I know, there was not one city representative in that courtroom throughout the whole trial. This man was here the entire time. The entire time. He took time away from his life, from his home, because it mattered, because it was important. As far as I could see, they just had a lot of attorneys and paralegals and staff working on how to avoid the acceptance of responsibility. So I guess the addendum to that, to the city is, if you're not going to accept responsibility, well, we may have to make you accept responsibility. So if they're going to file an appeal, believe me, we're going to be right there with them.
Anything else you guys want to add?
Well, I could also tell you that there was never an offer of even $1, of 1 penny on this case. There was never an offer. As though my client's son didn't matter. That's unacceptable.
Would you say offer like to settle?
There was never any offer to settle, nothing, zero. We did what we had to do. We were put in this situation. Period. We were put in this position. They were all out fighting to the end. And, you know, and that kind of goes along with it, that, you know, just a failure to accept responsibility, you know. I sat there through the course of this trial and I watched disjointed evidence be placed in, or attempted to be put into evidence, alleged criminal activity of my client, which just didn't exist. Unacceptable. Unacceptable. Accept responsibility, City of Seattle. Accept responsibility. And then maybe we can move on. But until that happens, here we are.
I appreciate all y'all's time and attention to what's taking place here. It's very, very sensitive for me, and it's very, very detailed. There's a lot of details, a lot of confusion, and I know it doesn't make sense to everybody. I know clearly being the father here, I'm affected in a way that I don't expect anybody else to understand. But for you all that showed up, for the press and media, that to make it relevant, I appreciate that. Thank you.
I just want to say one more thing. I really care about this man. I had a chance to really get to know him and get to know his son, even though I never met his son. There's a good man here, okay? And I stand with him. So you can tell that to the city of Seattle.
It's a good man too. His whole family, So I think the way he runs his business embodies the way that I ran my business. So that was a sign for me that I had the right team, helping me navigate. So
for me, it goes much deeper than the law. This is about justice.
thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Feel free to get pictures of any of this.